Hello and welcome to the Lost Boys podcast. I'm Tandy, joined by Harlan Fear. Say hi, Harlan.
Hi, Harlan.
And in today's episode, we're going to be going over cards from Rise of the Floodborn, Chapter 2 of Disney's Lorcana. In today's episode, we'll be picking basically our two favorite cards from each color. Some of them work well together, some of them don't. And we're going to discuss how these cards are going to impact, Chapter 2 Constructed.
Yeah, it's going to be great. I am so excited for this set to come out. I cannot wait to, be able to just jam all the cards, have the full spoiler, and just get down into the nitty gritty of what the metagame is going to look like. And while we can't do that yet, we thought it would be great to, dive in with what we have and see what our current, front runners are for how the metagame might shape up.
Yeah, I mean, look, one set constructed first chapter was really fun. Both of us played a bunch of games on Pixelborn. I mean, you and Brennan played like way more than me, but basically we're at a point where the first constructed format no longer matters because we are basically doubling the size of the card pool. And we all know from playing other games that once you double the size of a card pool, all bets are off.
Yeah, exactly. You get all of those cards that were kind of in the middle of the pack are still kind of the middle of the pack, but there's, however many cards were sitting on top of them, there's twice that now. So a lot of the cards you're used to seeing all the time may be role players or kind of completely fall out of the metagame. And all those cards that you're used to seeing, oh yeah, every Ruby deck has 4 copies of this card. There might be some more of those cards that every deck starts with 4 of.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one thing we need to look at when examining cards from Chapter 2 is how many of them are inkable and how many of these are going to be essentially building blocks for your resource base, or are they going to be uninkable and are they going to really start to stretch you thin when you hit the 15 plus uninkable mark?
Yeah, absolutely. That is the thing. I've always already been really strict about my uninkable counts. And there might be a caveat to that of like the ramp deck I've been playing has 16 uninkables. Granted, 8 of those actually produce an ink when you play them. So it's you have the awkwardness, but not the full punish of it. But most of my decks otherwise, I try and stay around 12, and I'm super strict on whether a card is playable based on whether it's inkable or not. If it's uninkable, it has a huge bar to clear, and that bar is only getting higher with the card pool increasing in size.
Oh, for sure. I think that, you're going to see what used to be staples in Chapter 1 constructed are not only going to be supplanted, they might be forgotten completely. And that's just the nature of the beast when it comes to printing new cards. Like if they're the same cost and they're both inkable and their stats are just slightly different and their abilities are slightly different, you start to see the tree branches, going in different directions as you build your deck around this one effect or this other 2-card effect. And with an ability like Shift being a focal point in constructed and in the game in general, you're going to see a lot of those cheaper iterations of the Shift characters become mainstays, especially when they're inkable, because they allow you to play that big baddie later on.
Yeah, we've already seen the metagame kind of homogenize around Stitch Rockstar and Tinkerbell Giant Fairy as Shift and songs, singing a song, are like the 2 most powerful ways to break parity in a game and, punish your opponent for them being on the draw or, catch up when you were on the draw and behind a bit. That's the easiest way to kind of shift that dynamic. No pun intended. And we now are going to have a lot more Shift cards. And also with this set being Floodborn based, I think we're actually going to have way more cards with Shift in this set 2 than we were in set 1. And it's going to be interesting to see the game kind of keep moving down that path, but also to have counterplay, and it's not just every deck is a Stitch Rockstar deck.
No, for sure. And some of the cards today we're going to be talking about are some of those big Shift characters that we're going to be building around as a focal point. But let's go ahead and just jump into the new cards so that the bulk of our episode this week revolves around actually discussing the new cards in specificity. We're going to start off in Amber, and we're going to go in order as far as alphabeticals is concerned for the colors. And so in Amber, the card that I chose, and I want to talk about this one, maybe not at length, but like to a reasonable degree, is Grand Duke, Advisor to the King. This 2-drop inkable is a 2/2 that quests for 1. And his ability is, yes, your majesty, your prince, princesses, kings, and queen characters get +1 strength. If you look at the majority of the characters in Steel and Amber that are seeing play in like the Stitch Rockstar deck, all of the Simbas are princes. The Cinderellas are going to be princes. You know, the only things that really aren't princes are like Lilo, Captain Hook, and Stitch, but almost everything else is like a Disney prince or princess. And having a 2-drop that buffs all your other characters makes like challenging more difficult. And when your bodyguard Simba becomes a 3/3 instead of a 2/3, that means Rafiki's not challenging and eating it for free and things like that. So I think that the static buff is something that, you know, these smaller characters like all the Simbas really desperately needed.
Yeah, I think it's going to add some interesting synergies with the deck, and in reality kind of counterplay, because as we've seen, it's not necessarily intuitive that when you're challenging a character, it's really like a defensive measure in the game where you're trying to remove their thing that is questing and pressuring to end the game. And I think it's going to have some tension with Prince Eric, specifically in Amber Steel. But I think it's also going to be very interesting in decks that, you know, aren't Amber Steel, just these other Amber decks as we branch out and all the color pairs become more playable as we get these more diverse card pools. That it's just a good card that is going to add dynamic gameplay, kind of like 2-drop Megara from Emerald.
Yeah,
I see
sure.
it being, you know, more of a niche role player that, you know, it's going to get inked a lot, but when it's good, it's going to be phenomenal at the 2 cost.
So I want to say I think that you're thinking of this card strictly as a way to upgrade your characters during challenges, much like support. But what I love about this card, since it's a static buff, it's like support that works on defense as well. And so while I'm questing and using my things to like Simba Protective Cub, they all have a +1 strength. And so, you know, the 1-drop Simba Future King, for example, becomes a 2/2 instead of a 1/2. Therefore, it doesn't get eaten by an opposing, you know, Stitch New Dog without trading. And so you're basically just giving these micro upgrades to these relatively weak static characters, but you're gaining those powerful play abilities or their static effects, whereas normally you would maybe lean towards maybe a bigger character that's a little more vanilla.
Yeah, that's a huge upgrade too that I hadn't really considered, that it is going to help you be more aggressive because you don't have to worry about slowly losing board presence over each turn, as, you know, a card like Simba Future King, Future King just falls by the wayside in challenges, right? Everything survives a challenge with Simba Future King for the most part. As soon as it gets that second point of strength, you know, it threatens to take the other character with it, and then you aren't just like losing your board pressure just for nothing over time just to get, you know, lore. You're actually trading off and eating away at their board while they're doing that, and that lets you keep developing the whole time.
Yeah, and you even brought up, you know, Prince Eric, the 2-drop from Steel. That one's obviously one of the better challenger cards because it has 3 willpower and allows you to eat a lot of the 2 strength characters without much trouble. The downside is that once you quest with it, it becomes really weak because it only has 1 strength when it's being challenged. But I think that just having Grand Duke in your deck not only makes your challenger character stronger, but it makes being able to quest a possibility, whereas I don't think it necessarily was before. And that's really what you're going to see. I think Grand Duke, while it looks like it's better for interacting with your opponent while they're questing, I think what it really does is just adds like an extra layer of difficulty to your opponent when they're trying to challenge your stuff. And the majority of the more popular characters in most of the Disney IPs are going to be princesses, kings, and queens. And so you're just going to see Grand Duke just be good for forever, basically.
Oh yeah, I think this card will be an all-star early release of the set, especially, you know, at your local game store for your league nights and stuff, where it's not Pixelborn. It's not going to show that +1 on the card. You're going to have to remember that it's there. Mm-hmm. And I think a couple people are probably going to get got by it a couple times before they get used to it too.
Yeah. All right. Well, moving on to our second card that I think is going to be pretty good in Amber. Harlan, why don't you tell us about your pick?
Yeah, so I chose the Queen Conquering Princess. So she is 5 cost, inkable, 4 strength, 3 willpower, 2 points of lore, and has shift 2. So we still haven't seen a smaller queen yet for the shift. So this is a bit of a speculative pick from me, but she does have an incredibly powerful ability. Her ability is Who is the Fairest? Whenever this character quests, chosen opposing character gets -4 strength this turn, and chosen character gets +4 strength this turn. And you'll notice just a small thing is that minus ability is just your opponent's characters, but the plus you can do on their stuff for the cards that care about how strong your opponent's stuff is.
Oh, is there anything in particular you want to pair with it? Is there like a sniper sniping a big creature or something like that?
Yeah, there's the song, what is it? The Mastermind. All right, yeah, so the card is World's Greatest Criminal Mind. It's 3-cost, inkable, banish chosen character with 5 strength or more. So this is an important card, I think, moving forward in Amber decks for being able to keep your opposing characters that are strong enough to really fight through your Rapunzel effects early and not let your opponent take over the game. And the downside typically is that, if your opponent only has smaller characters, this card isn't going to do anything and you're going to have to ink it. But, support characters and a character like the Queen can enable this card even when your opponent has smaller characters.
Yeah, I think that it's super cool that a lot of these buff effects can affect any character in play. And so you're just going to add a lot to this new song's, choice of targets. And the 5-cost Queen, Commanding Presence, your card for one of the best in Amber, might not have a shift right now, but just that quest, juice your thing, or my thing so I can challenge and shrink your other thing just seems like a nice little 1-2 punch. And, we haven't really seen a card do anything remotely close to what the Queen Commanding Presence does. We've seen a lot of the Sapphire cards that shrink one, and we've seen a lot of support cards that buff one. But doing both just essentially means that if your opponent goes to quest, they are in for a rude awakening.
Yeah, I think I foresee this card being something that absolutely dominates the board when it comes down, especially the fact that it is in Amber, so you have Rapunzel. And your opponent is already respecting Rapunzel, and then this is just another huge wrinkle to deal with. Even if we don't get a good base character for this to shift onto, just you putting this in play, they have so many boxes they have to check on their turn to not just get absolutely dumpstered on your turn.
All right, well, those are our 2 picks for the best 2 Amber cards released so far and how we think they're going to affect the decks they're going to go into. Next up, we're going to be moving on to Amethyst, and I'll start with my favorite Amethyst card. We're going to go with Merlin Goat. This is one of many Merlins, along with the Madame Mim character. There's just a bunch of iterations from the Sword and the Stone, I believe, where they're going back and forth in changing different forms and trying to trump card each other. And so that's kind of the flavor of it, right? They're both just kind of changing to beat each other, one-upping each other with their alternate forms. This build features a 4/3 that quests for 1. It costs 4 to play and is inkable. And the ability is Here I Come. When you play this character and when he leaves play, gain a lore. So we're having a character that can gain a lore without having to quest, and it pairs really nicely with those Madame Mim cards that return it to your hand. And so I think that this single-handedly will enable a more aggressive Amethyst strategy that can win the game without questing. And so I think it might be really bad for those Ruby Amethyst control decks.
Yeah, so I think it's really important to point out that, this is going to be a synergy element that these, especially Amber Amethyst kind of was already leaning into. But now that so much of it is solely contained in Amethyst, that you're going to be able to pair it kind of wherever you want to, which is really important. But, the thing that we've experienced so far is that these aggro decks get out ahead to an early lead and then have a hard time closing the game, getting that last 2, 3, maybe even 4 points of lore before your opponent starts, Aladdin Swift Heroic Outlawing you or Ursuling you, and you just fall out of the game. This Merlin is a way for you to close the game while being an inkable card early, so that you don't sacrifice development and have, like a Hades Lord of the Underworld rotting in your hand that you can't use right away. You can just ink this and then still have access to that late game plan later on in the game to close it out.
Yeah, I mean, I think this card checks all the boxes, right? I think a lot of the cards that we're seeing come out of the new set that look good are uninkable. The fact that this one's inkable, and in my opinion, one of the better enablers for the aggressive decks. This is actually a payoff. It's not an enabler.
Mm-hmm.
The enablers are the things that like return it back to your hand, but this just like hits right on curve. It gains lore when it comes in. So like if your opponent has emerald effects that bounce at like Genie on the Job or Mother Knows Best, doesn't really affect it that much. Obviously it only quests for one, so it's not that scary, but it kind of quests for two because you've already gotten one on the turn you played it. And so after that it's usually all bets are off. You can't really rely on a character to quest more than one time in a game of Lorcana. It doesn't happen that often.
Honestly, it's almost more like a quest for 3, because once it quests, they need to remove it too. Otherwise, it's going to quest again. And when they remove it, you gain another lore also.
Oh, right. That's so sick. Yeah. So when they deal with it and when it comes into play and when you quest with it. So yeah, good call on that. So I missed that from them challenging it. I just was assuming it was going to get bounced a bunch, but you're definitely right about it. Just like leaving play from getting banished in combat.
Another thing before we move on is just, I want to point out that this card works defensively also, where, you get your lore from playing it. And then when you need to use it to challenge their thing and remove their threat, you're still going to get another lore again.
Wow.
So you just you're always going up. I think this card is going to be the backbone of these Amethyst aggro decks moving forward, for sure.
Cool. All right. So moving on, we want to talk about your pick for Amethyst card. What you got for me?
Yeah, so I have Pinocchio Star Attraction. He's 2-cost, uninkable, 1/1 with 3 points of lore and no abilities. So
I would say that questing for 3 lore on a 2-drop is quite an ability, but it's not a keyworded ability.
Yeah, keyword large, right? Yeah, so everybody at home pretty much knows that I'm not the biggest fan of, Lilo making a wish, but this Pinocchio is such a threat that I think it completely shifts the dynamic and the paradigm of the games, where before we've seen that these decks struggle so much against the steel decks with Tinkerbell Giant Fairy and Grab Your Sword, right? But it's like an army in a can kind of situation, where it's so cheap to play this Pinocchio and you get so much lore off of it that this is a great follow-up to something like a Tinkerbell Giant Fairy or a Grab Your Sword, or you can force them to do it for way less resources, right? You can just invest your 2-cost play and then maybe play something with higher willpower as your additional play for the turn, and you can hedge your bets because this is so much pressure that you're going to force them to do it anyway.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is almost a sacrificial lamb, right? It's a very small body. You play it on 2. Usually you get to quest one time with it for 3 lore, and then it's going to get challenged for very little gain on your side. But the gain is the lore. Combat in Lorcana, yes, you have strength and willpower when you start comparing numbers about, getting the characters off of the table. But the third dimension of combat is lore generation, and that is the key to winning the game. And this is the only 2-drop that quests for 3, and it's brand new. And if you can protect it and you get a second quest off of it, man, it feels like it's going to be hard to come back from that. This specifically, I think, is going to encourage more people to play cheap direct interaction. Things like Fire the Cannons weren't that prevalent in Chapter 1 Constructed because it wasn't inkable. But now, in a world where cards like Pinocchio Star Attraction exist, cards like Fire the Cannons are going to go up in stock and so much value that I think you're going to see that. And that is going to mean Captain Hook, Captain of the Jolly Roger, is going to see more play because more people are going to be playing things like Fire the Cannons. So it's just going to change a lot of the dynamics of how people build their decks too, I think.
Yeah, it's funny. I think that this card may ultimately not end up seeing a ton of play. Like, I think it will out the gate, just like Lilo Making a Wish did. Mm-hmm. But I think it's going to fall off pretty quickly because all of those cards like Fire the Cannons are going to have to be more prevalent. And that's actually what I think this is going to be one of the single most influential cards to how decks are built moving forward, even though it will probably end up being removed from the decks. Just the threat of it will shift how the decks have to be built to keep up with a card like this, because it is such a huge threat.
Yeah, it's one of those things where often the threat of the thing is as important as the thing itself. If you play this on turn 2 on the play and your opponent doesn't have a way to defend against it, the game ends. And so you're going to see way more people playing 2-drop characters in their deck that have like high strength just to be able to like punch through and challenge stuff. You're going to see more direct removal, more AoE, things that might not normally see play if they can deal with Pinocchio Star Attraction and, to a lesser extent, Lilo Making a Wish and Maleficent Biding Her Time. You're just going to have a lot of those natural checks that are going to be showing up in decks. When I wrote Goon Theory for our Patreon, a few months back, and I posited that the strength of Lilo Making a Wish encourages people to build their decks with it in mind, and that means using a lot of your resource blocks in your deck, leaning towards those one-cost goons or other one-cost characters that can potentially challenge them. Because if you don't, they kind of run wild on you, and so I think that Pinocchio just kind of adds a second layer to that, where I can play a Lilo and say go. You play something that can challenge it. Okay, on my turn, I don't quest. I develop with a Pinocchio Star Attraction. You play another thing that can challenge. I play a big bodyguard that can protect both of them, and then you need a way to get rid of that so that you can get to my smaller, more juicy morsels. And we're just like, playing this stagger game, and it'll be nice to see how people approach that.
Absolutely. I look forward to seeing it and what it's going to do to the metagame.
All right, so that's Amethyst. We're going to be moving on to Emerald now. I'll start with mine. We're going to be talking about Donald Duck, the Perfect Gentleman. This is a 4-cost inkable character. It's a 2/5, so the stats are pretty good, and it quests for 2. It has shift 3, so it can shift on the other Donald Ducks, but it's kind of an expensive shift for a relatively weak body. I'll be looking to maybe shift this onto the 2-drop Donald Duck. Not Stretna stuff. That's the 4-drop from Sapphire, but I think there's a 2-cost 2/3 Donald Duck somewhere. But it says, allow me, at the start of your turn, each player may draw a card. This is something that we've seen in Magic quite a bit with Howling Mine, Kami of the Crescent Moon. This type of effect where it allows both players to draw cards can be powerful because it means that both players are flush with resources, but it also means that if you're a deck that translates cards to lore generation quite well, which Emerald is prone to doing, I think that this is a great card for your strategy because, hey, giving your opponent more resources doesn't matter if they're dead.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this card has the potential to be very, very strong. Another place that my brain immediately goes to is something like Emerald Sapphire with Bell, strange yet but special, where this can keep you flush on resources so that you can keep inking and keep playing your bombs. And it's another way to break that parity, kind of like we've seen with Bell versus Holding World decks, where okay, yeah, we both got 7 cards, but I get to use mine way better than you because my cards are bigger and I'm not slowed down. I'm not choked on resources. I can just keep playing 2 things a turn and I'll beat you on card quality. Where in the reverse is true, where okay, we both have a lot of resources, but now I have more ink and I can play my 2 cards every turn, and you are trying to catch up still. And you're going to have a lot of cards in your hand, but if I end the game with my Bell before that, who cares?
Yeah, I think that that's basically the key, is using your resources to end the game as quickly as you can, maybe pairing Emerald with something like those really big burst damage Amethyst cards like the Pinocchio we just discussed, like Maleficent Biding Her Time, and just leveraging every point of lore you can, squeezing every bit out of every single card. So by the time the game ends, you have an empty hand and 20 lore, and your opponent has, maybe a board full of stuff, maybe a handful of cards, but the game's over, and them having more cards doesn't really matter if you could translate your extra cards to lore generation to end the game.
Yeah, I will say that there is a big restriction on this, in that if the decks that are being played are good at translating their cards in hand into resources on the table. For instance, if Amber Steel Whole New World stays popular, this card may get held back by that because that deck is so good at playing all of its cards all the time. And then you're basically like gassing up your opponent for them.
So
and sorry, I just wanted to say that
Yeah.
Emerald is not great at playing from behind in the first place. So if you keep your opponent pedal to the metal, it's going to be even harder to come back.
I completely agree with you. And this actually reminds me of a really funny instance in Magic the Gathering. Back during Pro Tour Honolulu 2006, it was actually my first Pro Tour I ever went to. And I remember watching a top 8 match between one of the Hall of Famer Ruel brothers, and he was playing Ebony Owl Natsuke Howling Mine, this deck that was like very much about giving both players tons and tons of resources and then using it to deal damage to them. These decks were horrific against the low to the ground aggressive strategies that were able to translate damage more easily through onboard permanence. And in the top 8, I think it was Antoine Ruel mulliganed down to like, no cards. His opponent mulliganed down to like 3 or 4 cards, and it just didn't matter because the only way his deck could win was by giving the opponent resources, to the extent that instead of conceding, he added an ancestral recall to his hand and cast it to draw 3 cards as a joke, and then extended the hand because he knew it wouldn't matter. So you're absolutely right. Translating those extra cards to damage is very easy for some aggressive decks like Amber and Amethyst. And so because it's inkable, that means that you can ink this Donald Duck Perfect Gentleman and you just keep right on trucking. But against those control decks like Ruby Amethyst that already have 7 cards in hand, who cares if they have an extra resource? Yours are way more valuable.
Yeah, I do want to touch on one last thing before we leave this card is, the coming from Magic, the downside to all those cards like Howling Mine or Kami of the Crescent Moon was that your opponent got the resource first. This card does not work that way.
Right.
At the beginning of your turn, when you ready with it, that is when each player gets to draw the card. And that's a huge change. Not giving your opponent a bonus card as soon as you pass, and then they just Dragonfire your thing, and they're like, haha, thanks, idiot, for the extra card.
Yeah.
At least having to ready with it to for your opponent to get the card is a big upgrade, and might be the thing to move the needle on the card.
All right, next up, we're going to be discussing your pick for best Emerald card. Hit it me.
Yeah, so this is not only my pick for best Emerald card, it's my pick for best card in the set and maybe best card in the game. So my pick is Beast Relentless. He is a 6-cost, inkable, 4/5, quests for 2, and has Second Wind. Whenever an opposing character is damaged, you may ready this character.
Yeah.
I think this card is bananas.
Oh, yeah. Tell me what you can do with it.
So we've talked about this a little bit before on the pod, but so you can sing a Grab Your Sword is a nice, easy way to start.
And then it just readies itself.
Yeah, just as long as they had a character, why? And that's why you sang the Grab Your Sword in the first place. Yeah, he's just ready. He's ready to do whatever you want after that. So you could challenge their thing with him, and then as long as their thing had any strength, he readies, right? Actually, he just does the damage to the thing, and then he readies, and then he can just challenge another thing and ready again, and challenge another thing, and all right, he did his job. He's in the bin, but he killed 3 characters maybe.
No, on top of that, man, like you also have the ability to quest with it, attack with your small character, ready it, quest with it again, attack with another small character, ready it, quest again. And that's just on the surface. I think that we're going to find Beast Relentless has a lot of cool mini combos that work with, things like Tinkerbell, Giant Fairy. You're going to have all sorts of instances where both players develop a pretty large board. And then maybe at some point we find a deck that can give Beast Relentless Rush, like we play it in a deck that plays White Rabbit's Pocket Watch, and so then you use that in conjunction with Pocket Watch to attack down all your opponent's stuff or a couple of characters. So I just love that there's no restriction on the ready for questing, and the body on it means that like if it doesn't die, it can just keep attacking until it's dead.
In 2 months, I'm going to remind you when you're sick of this card that you said you're a fan of it not having restriction on questing.
Oh, I mean, look, I just want games to end more quickly because we have too many games going to time anyway. So if Beast Relentless is like the thing that ends that, good.
Yeah, he's gonna be ending some games. Yeah. I think it's also really cool. Like, I'm really excited. I've been waiting to play with like kind of the full spoiler to really dive in because it's really nice to play with the cards early, but sometimes you end up like getting suckered by a card that you think is sweet, and then like way later in the spoiler, something comes out that hoses it, and then you're already tunneled on something else. But I think it's going to be sweet with, like we were talking about the beast challenging, and then like you use another thing to challenge. Whenever you're using another thing to challenge and teaming up with the beast to remove a character, you still get to just add in a quest. You know what I mean? Like the beast can challenge and kill something, and then he's ready. So then you quest and then send your small thing into their other thing that you're going to team up with the beast, and you just get a bonus quest out of it too. This card is unreal.
I don't know what to say. It's good. It's real good.
Yeah, I like it. It's really good with steel cards, but it's really good with Rapunzel too.
That's true. I mean, it's just a good card. Like I think that the way that it works with your opposing small characters means that it works offensively to quest, right? And it also works defensively to challenge a bunch of things at once. I find no faults. It's also inkable. Worst thing about it is that it's only a 4/5 instead of like a 5/5 or a 6/5 for that 6 cost. But I mean, that's nothing when you start to think about the ramifications of just how many times it can quest in a single turn. All right. Next up, we're going to be moving on to Ruby. And I'll let you start with your Ruby card. Why don't you give us a rundown of what you picked?
Yeah, so I have Minnie Mouse.
Stylish Surfer.
Stylish Surfer.
Oh, yeah.
I couldn't read the stylish.
All the best cards are surfing.
Oh, yeah, they really are. She's styling on that surfboard. But yeah, so she's 3 cost, inkable, 1/3, 2 points of lore, and has evasive.
Wow. That's some stats right there.
Yeah, so I actually have this on here not for aggressive decks, although I do think she's going to be incredible in all the Ruby aggressive decks. I think this card actually has a perfect home in Ruby Amethyst.
Really?
Yeah, so you'll notice as we got later and later into this past metagame with set 1, where all these Ruby Amethyst decks started playing Pongo and Goofy, right? To be able to pressure your opponent while being evasive, so it was hard to challenge back, right? And that way you could get some pressure in. This card does that exact thing earlier and is an amazing body to sing Friends on the Other Side because it has evasive.
That's true. That's a good point. When we play other games, it's rare that something that's a good like damage generator is something that you necessarily want to play early on in like your control deck. But from my experience, those are often some of the more powerful things in these games because they create a leverage point in the early turns that allow you to kind of sculpt out later turns while A, giving you some amount of resources, or B, interacting with your opponent in some way. I love that this can challenge a Pascal, which is one of the more annoying cards to beat when you're playing Ruby Amethyst. I love that maybe with a little bit of a buff, you can attack and challenge an opposing character that also has evasive, but mostly I just like maybe a character that costs 3 and starts questing for 2 and can end the game sometimes before your opponent has the ability to deal with it outside of like a 5-cost Dragonfire.
Yeah, this card has huge curve considerations being a 3-slot. So you can just imagine the game where I play a Magic Mirror on turn 2, and then I play my Mini on turn 3, and I'm already off to the races. I have a threat in play. You have to answer me. Mm-hmm. And now on turn 4, instead of me playing like a Pongo, I can just draw a card with the mirror. And I'm just already ahead. So what does it matter? There's no, like, you have to answer my board now because I already have the late game locked up and I currently have pressure on you. So I'm going to draw a card and then I'm going to Dragonfire your big thing. and I'm gonna keep questing.
Yeah, I think Stylish Surfer just, generates a lot of pressure for a very small amount of resource investment. It has 3 willpower, so it doesn't get blown up by things like fire the cannons or grab your sword. It has Inkable, which is nice, and only costs 3. So a lot to love about Minnie Mouse Stylish Surfer. Anything else?
No, I think this card's great, and I think it's gonna be an unsung hero.
I mean,
You know,
it's my pick for best Ruby card. I let
yeah,
you have it on yours. I picked mine after I saw what yours was. And mine is another version of Minnie Mouse, and that's Wide-Eyed Diver. And this is not something that I want to shift onto Minnie Mouse Stylish Surfer, but it's another evasive type of Minnie Mouse that maybe goes into a different style of deck. And I think that the stats on it are quite good as well. 4 cost Inkable, 2/3. Quest for 1, and it has shift 2. It's a very cheap shift, and we have multiple Minnie Mouses already that cost 1 and 2, and now 3 with Minnie Mouse Stylish Surfer. It has evasive like the Stylish Surfer, but it says whenever you play a second action this turn, this character gets +2 lore. And so what that means is that if you're playing a deck with a bunch of cheap, 1 cost actions or songs that you're planning to sing, this Minnie Mouse Wide-Eyed Diver can quest for 3. That's a huge deal.
Yeah, it puts a lot of pressure on your opponent very quickly in a deck that, you almost have like a combo focus to you when you're going to fill your deck with, cards like Develop Your Brain and try and, churn and assemble. And, I think this card having a ceiling of 3 lore might keep it from being, too ridiculous.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit before we started recording about, what if this was just whenever you played an action, it got +1. I think the card would obviously it would be better. But I don't know if it would be too good then. And, this is a card that we really won't know how good it is until we play with it. But also it's going to take time to figure out how to build the deck with it, because it's not intuitive to how Lorcana decks are built. This reads way more similar to like a Magic card than a Lorcana card.
Yeah, I mean, look, you have to pair it with things that replace themselves. You have to pair it with things that cost very little ink. And the way that Lorcana is usually played, it's a scaling system, right? Like, instead of trying to deploy a ton of things that cost 1 and 2, most decks are built to go 1 to 6. And because of that, if you have to play a bunch of these cheap, cyclers or whatever, you're not able to play cheap characters that can interact with your opponent. And so that leaves like another vulnerability point for your opponent to exploit via small characters. So, a lot to think about when building with Wide-Eyed Diver. I think it's a bit worse than Stylish Surfer, which is a shame because the Stylish Surfer is like a common and the Wide-Eyed Diver is one of the cooler rares in the set. But I don't know. I'm more excited about the Stylish Surfer than Wide-Eyed Diver.
Yeah, me too. I think, this card's going to be a sweet build around. I think it's going to be a fan favorite for sure. I don't know if it's going to be a competitive all-star. I would venture to guess probably not, but you never really know what they're going to print later. Like we might get a really cool action that, it plays an action from your discard pile, and then that immediately turns it on right there. Right. That would be sweet. This card might have a bright future. It's definitely going to be sweet to play with, and everybody's going to have a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, I mean, we're just seeing building blocks right now, right? Mm-hmm. We're in the first couple sets. You're seeing a lot of cards being printed that will only get better. For example, like the Singer mechanic, like this is something that if it's on a card, you're always going to have to reevaluate that card once a song gets printed that has that number or less on it. And, it'll just be interesting to see how the game develops around things like Minnie Mouse Wide-Eyed Diver. Like, what is the break point? Do you ever allow 0-cost actions to be printed? And if you do, can they ever say draw a card on them? You get into really sticky dangerous territory when you have things that replace themselves, and also maybe even recoup the resources spent to play them. Imagine, if you will, a 2-cost card that generates more resources than you play, such as Zero to Hero. I don't know that Zero to Hero and Minnie Mouse Wide-Eyed Diver necessarily go in the same deck, but that type of resource generation, and the card essentially paying for itself plus and being a song, all lead into potentially having more viability for Wide-Eyed Diver. All right, that is Ruby. Let's move on to Sapphire. We got a nice little pair of cards here. I'll start with mine. It's not that impressive. This is a 2-cost Cogsworth Talking Clock. It's 2 costs for a 2/3 inkable and quest for 1, and it has an ability that says, wait a minute, your characters with Reckless gain 1 lore. So Gaston, Arrogant Hunter, these are types of cards that, Maui Hero to All, these are cards that don't quest, and Cogsworth allows them to, which is kind of cool. But that's not why I like this Cogsworth. So I'm just going to basically skip over everything I want to say about this Cogsworth and let you talk about your card.
It's all right. We can share because right. we actually both chose this Shift Cogsworth as our Sapphire card for this episode. And, Todd, being the great guy that he is, he lets me have all my first picks, and then, he takes sloppy second. So I'm willing to share this one with him, but I'm keeping the next one. So Big Cogsworth is a 5-cost inkable, 2 strength, 5 willpower, shifts for 3, has ward, 2 points of lore, and it has the ability
Unwind.
Unwind.
Yeah.
Your other characters gain resist +1, and that ability is ridiculous.
Yeah,
I don't know if if the viewers at home haven't seen the Versus video we did with this card, if you want to go back, that's on our YouTube page here. And this card is gross. Absolutely disgusting. Yeah, I'm in fear of this card when the set comes out.
So it's Cogsworth Grandfather Clock is the surname of it, and we played a couple of games with this card in my deck. I built a Sapphire Ruby deck called Gaston, where I was playing Arrogant Hunter to work with Cogsworth Talking Clock, but I was also playing a developed brain version of Gaston to be able to shift onto it. And I also wanted to play the Cogsworth packages because I thought that the Grandfather Clock was just so strong. And I mean, it was like picture perfect. The first time I put Grandfather Clock into play, it was like, oh, none of my AoE cards do anything anymore. None of my small characters challenge anymore. And as long as my Cogsworth Grandfather Clock is at the ready, no one can challenge it and no one can target it with removal. And so all of your other characters just get that really powerful resistibility across the board, which makes it so difficult for your opponent to interact with you.
Yeah, I think early on, people are going to shove this in all their Sapphire decks because this card is ridiculously good. It's very strong.
It's so much better than the Aurora that exists that gives everything ward, and people love that card. I don't know why.
Yeah, and the Jasmine that heals all your characters for 2 when it comes in and when it quests. Cogsworth does basically half that just off the jump with resist, right?
Right.
So kind of diminishes the need for it. And the thing that people are, I think, going to very quickly catch on to is that this card is not for questing. It has those 2 points of lore, but that only happens once, and that's at the end of the game.
Yeah.
Keep this guy ready.
We learned that pretty quick. I was trying to find little places to squeeze in some quests for 2, and every time I did, I got max punished. And then even moving past that, when we had the Lost Boys Lorcana Invitational at Apex Gaming last month, one of the trends I saw among the best players was just stop. Don't do anything in the first 5 turns other than play characters. The moment you start singing, the moment you start questing, that leaves you vulnerable to opposing interaction, whether it's challenging or a combination of a removal spell plus challenging. They're able to break through your defenses pretty well. And so if you just always leave Cogsworth at the ready and you never quest with it, it's very difficult for your opponent's effects and challenges to do much of anything against any of your characters.
Absolutely. Yeah, early game Lorcana is a lot like playing chess. You're moving your pieces around, jockeying for position on the board, and it's all about threatening to do something, not actually doing it.
Right.
You really want a good closed position, and Cogsworth grandfather clock is like a queen in the back corner. She's laser beaming everyone, making sure you're not doing nothing. And that the threat is better than getting your queen up in the mix and losing it.
Yeah, I think both these Cogsworths are somewhat valuable. The 2-cost one, Talking Clock, the stats on it are good. It's a 2/3. It can challenge an opposing 1-drop character with ease. I doubt that the Reckless ability is going to gain you too much lore in the long run. I think if you play, Ruby, Sapphire together, that's a great place for that Cogsworth to do something other than be just a generic shift body. But I really think that it enabling the 5-cost grandfather clocks, shift just makes that card even better than it already is, which is a phenomenal 5-drop as it stands.
Yeah, I'm excited for the deck building challenge of how many, Cogsworth ticking clock do I play? Do I want any in my deck? Because my grandfather clocks they're only 5 cost. I could just play those. But getting that card down even earlier is really powerful, because that's a spot where I could quest for 2 because they don't have the characters in play to challenge it. And also, do I want to have a 2-cost role player in my deck? Do I need to have a different 2-cost role player? This is inkable.
Right.
I can just ink it to develop. I'm excited for that portion of it a lot.
All right, we're going to be moving on to our last pair here. We're going to be moving into Steel, and I'll start with mine again, but we're going to go pretty fast into yours because this is another 1-2 punch. To start, we're going to go with Cinderella Knight in Training. This is a 2-cost, 2/2 quest for 1, and it's inkable. The ability is Have Courage. When you play this character, you may draw a card and then choose and discard a card. That ability, very similar to Simba Future King's ability, but I think the stats on Cinderella, just having 1 more strength, means that it rumbles in combat a little bit better. I like that it's inkable, but what I like most is that it's a shift target for your card.
Yes. So my card is 7 cost, inkable. It's Cinderella Stout-Hearted. She's 5 strength, 5 willpower. Quest for 3, has shift 5 and resist 2. Huge ability. And then the real kicker is the Singing Sword. Whenever you play a song this turn, this character may challenge ready characters this turn.
Yeah, just
importantly,
a huge
it's
body.
Play a song, not sing a song.
I think that it counts.
No. So like you can sing or play it is what I'm saying.
Oh, sure. Yeah, so it doesn't require you to sing it.
Sing it, but you can sing it to get this ability.
Gotcha.
And I think this card is going to be like a fundamental include in Steel decks moving forward because of 2 of the other cards we have in this video, Cogsworth Grandfather Clock and Beast Relentless, where both of those characters realistically are always going to be ready and are a nightmare for Steel decks to deal with.
No, I think that that's a great point. I mean, I think Steel having 2 of the more widely played songs with A Whole New World and Grab Your Sword, pairing that naturally with Amber and Amber having some songs and then using Ariel, Spectacular Singer, I think that Stout-Hearted just becomes like your de facto late game drop. And if you can pair it with Zero to Hero in the Stitch Blitz style strategy, you just get just monstrous shift characters at the top end that are inkable, so that doesn't cause you to stumble early. But then they have payoffs at either the like turn 3 or 4 slot with Zero to Hero on the super explosive draws, or they just pair really nicely in your natural curve by letting you go shift on 5, directly challenge something, and then the resist 2 protects it from taking basically any damage in any of those challenges. And then if your opponent has that problem character, it becomes a surgical knife, right? You get to sing one of your songs, even just, the Be Our Guest, right? You sing that off a Simple Protective Cub, and then suddenly Cinderella becomes a laser beam that just shoots right into your opponent's best character.
Yeah, I think that two of the abilities on this card are massive, which obviously is the shift, because 7 is a pretty restrictive cost in this game. You're gonna get there, but a lot of times you your sevens need to have impact the turn you play them, like Ursula, Surfer Stitch, Hades, Schemer, where this Cinderella is not going to have that impact unless you're shifting it. So it's really important to have this lower cost Cinderella in the same color,
Right.
because then you can play this in any steel deck. It doesn't have to be a specific steel pair, which is huge. And then this card, not only is it an amazing defensive tool because of the Singing Sword ability, but it is an amazing threat. It quests for 3, is a 5/5, and has resist 2.
It's so hard to kill this thing and by challenging it.
Yeah, the only commonly played card that kills this in combat is Maleficent Dragon, Monstrous Dragon, which costs 9. Mm-hmm. This effectively costs 5. And then the Maleficent might have blown it up anyway, but it has to have 7 strength to clear this thing.
I mean, what this says to me basically is that if you want to interact with this Cinderella, it's not going to be by dealing damage. Resist 1, we've seen how strong that is in testing already just by playing the Cogsworth Grandfather Clock, and now we're going to get to see the resist 2 ability on such a large character that quests for 3 and has that just laser nature with Singing Sword. I have to imagine that this is going to be top 3 cards in the set, and I think that combined with Cinderella Knight in Training, you're just going to have an easy way to get it into play with that steel package. And I look at steel as the best color in the game right now because of this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this Cinderella is going to be almost like an auto include, just like this package, just like Tinkerbell Giant Fairy is in every steel deck. This Cinderella also is going to be doing the same thing. Steel is an archetype, is already built around songs in general with Grab Your Sword. And then this is it's your best counterplay against the cards that are good against you, like Cogsworth Grandfather Clock. And it's just the best threat you can play. Steel has not had good 3-point questers. The only one we really had in Chapter 1 was Maui, Deity God, and he costs 8 for an 80.
He's a big boy, but it's kind of slow.
Yeah, historically, Steel has not been terribly great at questing. They were just so good at controlling the board that you win slower, but you still win. But now they get to do both. This card just controls the board, is really hard to remove, and quests for 3.
My only problem with Simba Future King, the 1-cost looter from Steel, was that only 1 strength meant it was very easy for your opponent to eat in combat, which meant that it was ink most of the time unless you already had something like Stitch Rockstar on the table and were able to play it and draw an extra card off of it, and sacrificing it at will was actually just more than fine. The Cinderella Knight in Training, being able to loot when it comes in, discarding one of your uninkable songs if you're far away from being able to use it, I think makes a world of difference in terms of smoothing out your draws and maybe playing all 8 of them, for Future King and for Cinderella Knight in Training. I know Kurt Spies, one of our top 8 competitors at the Lost Boys Lorcana Invitational, was playing 4 copies of Future King. He actually ended up winning the Games and Comics Paradise 2K that you attended last weekend, and he was playing for Future King. So I think maybe we just find some way to shove these together into the same package, hopefully.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, that is going to do it for all of our cards from Rise of the Floodborn, Disney's Lorcana Chapter 2. We went over 2 cards from each color that we thought were going to have a significant impact on the constructed format, and those are our picks. Moving on, we have a few segments left that we'd like to do, and we're going to start off with one of my favorites, Ask Harlan Anything. All right, so we're here for Ask Harlan Anything, and we have a nice one from one of my good friends, Braden MTG. Braden says, nothing to hide. The new card from Sapphire. Each opponent reveals their hand, draw a card, costs 1 and is inkable. He says, is this card good in any deck, Harlan?
Yeah, so the short answer I gave Braden directly was not currently, but this is part of a second chapter coming out. It has a lot of potential for the future. This reminds me So it reminds a lot of people that came from Magic to Lorcana as Gitaxian Probe, when in reality it's actually Peak, which is a much worse Magic card. But it does have the caveat of this is an ink. It's inkable. You can just play it as an ink when you don't have that free resource. So it occupies a very similar space with Develop Your Brain. And I think where it's actually going to shine is with your card for Ruby this week, which was Mini Mouse Wide-Eyed Diver.
Yes!
Right? This gives you that critical mass of actions potentially to turn on your Mickeys every turn.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. It's one of those cards, like, again, it's only going to get better over time, and its effect is minimal, but it's inkable. And so there's very little downside other than just how it restricts your physical deck building. But it does replace itself. So later in the game, it's just going to basically mean the next thing you draw costs one more. But you get some more information about whether or not your opponent has something like Be Prepared in hand. So a very minor effect, but one that can offer a lot of important information given the right context.
Yeah, I think this card is really going to shine on like turns 3, 4, maybe 5, where you're both still in that jockeying position for that initial board state before the game really becomes about, all right, what am I drawing from here? That's going to be the tail end of, all right, I sculpted my game plan after my mulligan. This is what I'm going to be doing this game. And knowing what your opponent is building towards when you still have enough resources to kind of pivot is huge. And that's where I think this card will shine, if it shines at all.
Yeah, I think that's going to be one of those cards where, people are going to just shove 4 in their deck when they buy a box of Chapter 2 and they slot it into their Sapphire deck. But they're going to realize that, I drew this on turn 5 or 6. I don't really need another ink. Playing it means I don't get to play my 6 draw. Okay. All right. I start to see where the downside comes from. But then you're going to have some spots where it's like, I have 5 ink and a 4 drop in my hand. I'm going to see what you have going on over there. Oh, you have a Grab Your Sword. Okay, I need to play around that. So instead of playing, this character that quests for 3 but has, 2 willpower, I'm going to instead play this thing that has 3 willpower and only quests for 2 to play around it. So, a little bit of give and take. I think that its true strength will derive from things that can sit and play and gain value from playing actions. And Minnie Mouse Diver is one of those things. And if we get more, maybe those types of cards will be much stronger in the future.
One thing I do want to caution the viewers at home about when you're playing this card, it is a bit worse than Develop Your Brain. And something, if you've already been playing with Develop Your Brain, have probably noticed is that, do I ink this? Well, I have an extra ink available this turn, and I'll just draw a card that's inkable anyway, and maybe I'll find something better, and if not, I'll just ink that thing. This card, you don't get the choice of 2 cards, right? You're way more likely to hit an uninkable off of this,
right?
So proceed with caution. If you have a pretty high uninkable count, sometimes it's better just to not know what's in their hand and just guarantee to hit your ink drop for the turn. So
now, one last thing I want to note too is that there is a rule in Lorcana that strictly prevents taking notes. This rule is designed to make sure that both players are not revealing their ink, writing it down, and having information for later about everything your opponent's inked so that you have perfect information about what cards are left in their deck or in their hand. It creates a lot of really small problems. And so when you look at their hand, you just have to take a photograph in your mind, and that's it. And then as the game progresses, you can say, hey, did you have a Be Prepared in hand when I looked at it 2 turns ago? Your opponent can say, beats me. I don't remember. So keep that in mind. You're not allowed to take notes about your opponent's hand. That's a lot different than Magic the Gathering, where these cards like Peak and Gitaxian Probe would allow players to write down the contents of their opponent's entire hand. Well, Harlan, I don't think it's that good to do card of the week this week because we did 12 cards of the week, basically.
Yeah, we extended your favorite segment.
That's true. Well, second favorite segment behind Ask Harlan Anything. If you would like
12 of those and only one of your favorite.
Okay. Well, maybe next week's episode we'll ask Harlan 12 things. That sounds fun.
Ooh.
So make sure to, if you'd like your question to be read on screen, on stream, on podcast, make sure to tag us in the comments. Make sure to tag us on Twitter at LostBoysLOR. Ask Harlan a question. Ask Harlan anything. Maybe your question will get picked for next week. Thanks again to Braden MTG for asking his question this week. We really appreciate you. For all things coming up Lorcana wise, there is a tournament at our sponsors store coming up in about 10 days, I believe. Not this weekend, but next weekend. We're going to be heading up to Games and Comics Paradise in Fairfax, Virginia for their release event for Disney's Lorcana Chapter 2. Should be a really fun time. Make sure to head on out to gcparadise.com for all of your TCG needs, from Disney's Lorcana all the way down to Magic the Gathering and Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! gcparadise.com's got you covered on singles as well as all your supplies. Thanks again to Games and Comics Paradise for sponsoring the Lost Boys podcast. I think that's going to do it for me this week. You got anything else you want to say to the viewers at home, Mr. Harlan, before we say goodbye?
Just keep an eye on previews and let us know your questions for sure. I've really enjoyed answering these questions, and a lot of people have DM'd me and stuff, but it's great to have them on the episode. Love to the viewers at home. All right. Well, thank you so much to everyone for watching this week's podcast or listening to it on where you listen to podcasts. We'll be doing essentially a full set review, I think, in the near future once we get the entirety of the set. That'll be more of a quick hits thing where we just look at every card, give our initial impressions. We'll talk about maybe a thing or two if we want to harp on any specific card. But, we're going to have all access to the entirety of the spoiler within the next 7 days, and we'll be trying to get that out to you as soon as we can. Thank you so much to all of our behind the scenes folks, our director Dan. He has to cut this together out of all of my mistakes, and I appreciate him. And for you at home, thanks again for watching. I'm Tandy of the Lost Boys, and that's Harlan. Say bye, Harlan. Bye, Harlan.